4 years and 6 months. That's how old the GTX 1660 Super is. Although released in 2019, this is one of the most popular cards during the GPU crisis. I know because when the RTX 3080 was announced, I sold my card waiting for the RTX 3080 to be in stock. But when the mining boom happened, I just had to get a card and I got the 1660 Super. Fast forward today, and let's see if this card is still capable for fast-paced competitive games wherein speed and stability is really important. And to make things interesting, we're also going to compare this card against Nvidia's latest entry-level card, the RTX 4060. Okay, let's go. And for those who are new to the channel, we are running both of these cards on our Ryzen 5800 X3D rig. Latest drivers were used at the time of recording, and all benchmarks were run at least 3 times before recording I started to ensure stability. And to reflect real-world gaming experience, we have used competitive settings on all games listed here. Okay, let's start with Warzone, and as you probably know, this is one of the games in our competitive suite, which is quite demanding on almost everything. And saying that, this game also has a very volatile performance as it does change a lot during every patch or season. Now this is 1080p native with a GTX 1660 Super. Not that impressive. We're getting close to 100 FPS with some negligible microstutters on our frame time chats. Okay, let's boost up our frames and enable FSR 3 without the frame gen aspect. And as you can see here, we have a slight bump on our FPS. Low seems to be relatively the same. Our GPU clock speeds with FSR 3 has bumped a little bit, which probably has resulted in this slight performance increase. On firing scenes, we can see that this is consistent. We're getting better frame rates here with the FSR 3. Against the RTX 4060, that's definitely a huge margin here. With a better card, our CPU is able to push for more performance and therefore more frames, hence why we're able to get better results. And this is also consistent with firing shots. On the game itself, frame times is mostly stable. However, because we are running lower FPS, we are getting frame times of about 9 milliseconds or even more, which isn't that good for competitive gaming. You need at least 8 milliseconds or lower, although you can still frag, but you will feel the delay in game. And the go lag, you do get slightly better frames here as it's much more smaller and confined space, but that's about it. And before we move on, boys, if you like the taste that we do here, hit that like button. It really helps us a lot. Okay, let's move on to the next game. Apex Legends, another fast-paced shooter, and let's start off with some good old static benchmarks against the RTX 4060. And there's no surprises here. The RTX 4060 is almost double in terms of raw 1080p performance against the 1660 Super. We are both GPU bottleneck in this scenario. On firing shots on the ground, we do see the gap tighten a little bit. It's not as bad as when we are just on static shots with long view distances. We can easily get about 300 FPS here with the RTX 4060, while we are maxing out at around 200 FPS with our GTX 1660 Super. Heavy action scenes, however, are a different matter. We can see how the GTX 1660 Super drops its frames pretty hard as compared to the much stronger RTX 4060. In game, with some real action, we are getting really decent FPS here, around 180 FPS for the GTX 1660 Super, while we are throwing some shots here and there. Obviously, we are still GPU bottleneck, but not that bad at all, even with the random effects that we have here. Let's now move on to Fortnite, and as always, let's quickly go through all APIs here, starting with TX12 head-to-head against the RTX 4060. Now the GTX 1660 Super just doesn't have enough juice to compete here. Pretty low FPS with worse 0.1% lows. This is not the best case scenario, which is expected for most Nvidia cards. Even our RTX 4060 is struggling to reach 300 FPS here. Moving over to the X11, and here we can see that we are now getting slightly higher FPS with the GTX 1660 Super. However, we're still struggling to reach 240 FPS, which isn't really good if you're a competitive gamer. So here we have everyone's favorite API for Fortnite,
performance mode, we finally are able to reach more than 240 FPS, and we are also getting much more stable 0.1% lows compared to the RTX 4060, although the average and 1% lows would still definitely go in favor for the 4060. And for everyone else that's curious, here's all three APIs combined together for your reference. On real-world gameplay, here we can see the GTX 1660 Super going strong with over 300 FPS and lows at around 190. On this heavy action scene, we do get some frame time spikes, which does affect our gameplay. I don't know, this could be server related. It is bearable, but definitely not the best experience if you're gaming competitively, especially on these intense moments. In Valorant, the GTX 1660 Super goes very well in a competitive 1080p environment. Against the RTX 4060, it's not far behind on a running benchmark, although this is mostly because our GTX 1660 Super is close to maxing out here. On heavier scenes, we can see that the GTX 1660 Super does have a slightly higher lows compared to the 4060. And for those who are new to the channel, this is expected. In Valorant, the more a card is pushed to its limit, the more it generates better lows. That's it, lows 1% and 0.1% lows, which becomes apparent on this heavy action scene. Moving on to PUBG, and once again we are running the DX11 Enhanced API. I haven't actually reviewed different APIs for PUBG. I might try to do that in the future. If you're keen on that, let me know in the comments. Let's start with the running shots, and we can see in here that we are both close to maxing out our GPUs. The RTX 4060 has commanding lead over the 1660 Super, and this is a big leap in performance for approximately $100 more or 50% additional cost of the 1660 Super. In our heavy action scene with our mortar shots, we can see that the RTX 4060's lead is still there. The GTX 1660 Super is trying to hold on to its performance, and we are not able to reach the 144 FPS mark here, although frame times remains to be stable. On actual gameplay, it's not that bad for the GTX 1660 Super. In urban scenarios, we're running at 140 FPS, and you can see that we definitely can hit those shots from here. We do get the occasional frame time spike, but so far it's okay. For the most part, it's pretty stable, although your frame rate is definitely not the best one. You'll just have to accept that. Okay, let's go play the finals, and let's start by comparing the native 1080p performance of the GTX 1660 Super against 1080p with FSR2 turned on. With FSR2, you can definitely see that we're gaining some favorable frame rate here on the running scene, and on heavy action scene, this trend seems to continue. We are not that affected here. There's some micro stutters, but it's mostly negligible. However, image quality does have some noticeable difference there. Against the RTX 4060, the GTX 1660 Super is lagging behind with almost 100 FPS difference between the two cards and this running benchmark. And on action scenes, this is the same trend, more FPS for the 4060, and if you look on finer detail, the 4060 has better 1% lows. However, its 0.1% lows do suffer at times. This is pretty negligible, it's just a nitpick. When we go to the arena and actually game against real players, it's definitely a different case for the GTX 1660 Super. And now in this case, we've just run 1080p with DAA, no FSR2, because we wanted better clarity and visibility, and the performance is much lower compared to our control benchmark. We're getting about 110 FPS here. It's okay, not that good if you are competitive, and you can see that the frame times is also not that consistent. There are some micro stutters here which will affect your precision and your muscle memory. So it's okay, but not that great. And this is most likely because we are heavily pushing our card to the limit. 4.5 years later, you can definitely see that our 1660 Super is showing its age. The thought of potentially upgrading to a $300 card now, like the 4060, yields significant performance jump on our competitive games. I wish I could show you guys the full benchmark runs for all the games, but that'll make the video too long and not too friendly with the YouTube algorithm. And speaking of which, I was thinking of maybe just setting up a Patreon or a YouTube membership so I could just post the whole benchmark run there for people who are interested, and maybe I could put your name on the video or something like that. This will help us financially so we can purchase much newer cards for our testing. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you.